Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Barton from Nacogdoches Independent School District Police Department. He has 23 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Barton. Thank you so much for being here.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Did I say it right?
Yes, Nacogdoches.
For anyone who's listening, I was like saying it over and over and over again. I'm like, I hope that I do it justice. So I said it correctly. I did
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and coming on here. I know you've been in this profession for 23 years. Why? Why law enforcement?
Well, matter of fact, I'll give a shout out to my dad. He got me into it. Today's his actual birthday, so I'll tell him happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, so that's where I got my start, was through my father.
Okay. That's amazing. Was he in law enforcement too?
Correct. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
And what did you learn from him? What was it about the job or about the way he presented himself that you were like, this is it, I want to be like him?
Well, the thing is with him, he always instilled into me, no matter, you're going into the field of law enforcement. And his big thing is I raised you to be a certain way. Just because you put on a uniform, you're not going to, basically be the same person all the time. So be genuine off duty and on duty.
I really like that. I think anyone who's listening can relate to how certain situations maybe change people or certain titles change people, and having that sentiment of like, never forget where you came from, never lose who you are. But I like how you said that the authenticity of who you are is so important. And it is a really important reminder that we're never better than anybody else. And no matter what title or role or rank or, whatever we have, that at the end of the day, you go home and we're just us.
Yep, we're just us. And that's the thing, is there's several careers and jobs out there that require you to wear a uniform. And it's, like I said, law enforcement, it is a job. It's not my identity, but it's my job. It's my passion. Because like I said, I've dedicated my entire adult life to this career.
Yeah. It's really funny that you say that, because I have like my right-hand girl that helps me with everything. And when she started, she would always be like, our founder, our founder, our founder. And I was like, can you stop saying that? Like, I'm just Paige. I understand if maybe you want to give context like one time, but at the end of the day, like, I'm just Paige, and that's who I am. And that's who I want people to know me as. And I think that it's a really important piece to wellness too, to not let your identity get wrapped up entirely in what you do, because what you do is stressful and it's very time consuming, and it does feel sometimes like it envelops you, and like you don't know where that separation is between work life and like life. And so,
yeah, I mean, it really is hard to balance, law enforcement, because you have to go and you have to have command presence. You have to always have your guard up, and then it's kind of hard to be sitting on yellow all the time and then never really let your guard down. And then when you go home, I'm guilty of it. I've been on edge too whenever I was still working the streets. And I mean, it does. It's different for sure.
Yeah. What do you think has helped you? Because we hear this saying all the time of like work-life balance, and there's some people who do not believe in balance at all. And there's some people that are like, yep, it's a hard stop, hard line. What does home life balance mean to you, or what does that look like to you?
Try not to be hypocritical with this, because I have a hard time turning it on and off like we just talked about. Because now that I've taken on the role of this chief position, I'm responsible for several phone calls after hours and things like that. And I try to give myself a timeline that, okay, I'm going to not take any calls after a certain hour and spend time with my children, because like I said, they're 15 and 12 and they're all in sports. And so it's very hard nowadays to actually have the afternoon to where everybody's home. And I really, really enjoy those days to where just sitting on the front porch and asking them how their day went. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult. I don't know if there is a world where it's a hard stop when we're dealing with humans. I think that there's always going to be things that come up. There's always going to be thoughts or, things that we find ourselves thinking about late at night that keep us up, and I think that there are strategies and there are resources and there are ways to set priorities and boundaries, but I don't think it's a perfect system. And I think to your point, how can you give yourself grace and understand that there might be times where the balance isn't 50-50, and there's going to be one that outweighs the other, but it's trying to create that consistency, and that maybe level of like, I don't want to say normalcy, but having other things outside of the career that keep you going on a consistent basis, but it's never going to be a perfect system. And I'm guilty of it too. And I really appreciate you saying that because I think everyone can relate to that. It's like, we're never going to be perfect.
Yeah. And we're never meant to be perfect. There was only one person that was perfect and they crucified him for it. So that's what I keep telling myself too, is like, I'm going to make mistakes. I own my mistakes. I don't try to hide or run from it. I'm 100% genuine when I mess up and pretty quiet even when I do good, because I try to stay humble. I don't like to brag on myself at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the one thing that you said that kind of popped in my head is, how do we just learn from our mistakes or the times where we fumble a little bit, and I think having that self-assessment is so important, because it's one thing to be like, yep, I'm going to make mistakes. So like, deal with it. I'm imperfect, but to say, hey, like, I understand that I'm not perfect, but when I do have those moments of imperfection or those like learning lessons, I'm going to take that time to own it, to step back, to say, okay, how can I improve moving forward? Is there something that I could have done differently? And I think having that self-assessment is so important. And I also think that, and I would love your opinion on, resiliency and what it means to you, because I also think it's one of those like elusive words where everyone has a different definition of what it is. But for me, it's how quickly can we get back to baseline so that we can keep going? And you said like when things are really good, you try not to get too high. And then when things are really low, we try not to get too low and we try not to stay there for very long, right? How can we get back to that like baseline level so that we can have forward movement?
Yeah, it's I guess it's life, Pardon me, my phone. Yeah. So, but like I said, it's life, and life always from day to day there's always going to be challenges, and I think I embrace the challenges to an extent because I really feel that it it helps me think and become a better person. If every day was perfect, I would be bored out of my mind. I enjoy the unpredictability. I guess that's why I like this job too, because it's never predictable.
Yeah. Do you think that you are always that way where like you encouraged a little bit of adversity, or do you feel like that came with time?
That came with time. That came with time because I used to really internalize things and beat myself up on not even in the profession, but just playing sports and, you just growing up, I would always internalize and I hated messing up. But then I started realizing that messing up's not a bad thing because at least I'm putting myself out there to mess up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when I was younger, I had so much fear of failure. And I think it looks a lot different now as I've gotten older that, I feel like my greatest growth opportunities have come from failure. But it's still difficult, and I'll get like maybe a little bit vulnerable on here right now. But when I was growing up, I wanted to be perfect because it was attached to my self-worth. I grew up in an environment that was not the best. And I was like, well, maybe if I'm prettier or smarter or funnier, or if I was more athletic and, I was, winning awards, that would make my parents love me and stop doing what they were doing. And so a lot of what I did and like that striving to be perfect was like hoping that I would get the like, validation that I like so desperately needed when I was younger. And I've had to like almost try to unlearn that a little bit, and I'm in a space now where my career is public in a way, like I share my story on this podcast. I've done, conferences and keynote speaking opportunities where I share about myself, and you're in these rooms where whether people want to admit it or not, like you feel the judgment sometimes from people who are like rolling their eyes or they're not into whatever it is that you're saying. And you feel almost that like
That energy.
rejection,
Yeah.
and I have many times crawled into like a ball after and like attached that so much to my self-worth. But through time, I've been like, you know what, like I'm going to not do that now in my older age and realize that how they feel has nothing to do with me. But it is a really hard thing to
It
feel like
is.
you
It
failed
is.
or people aren't, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because you
it's
don't want
interesting.
people living your head rent free. And that's the thing is I'm guilty of the same thing is like I'll overly judge myself
Mm,
whenever I do or say something, and then I'll think about it and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or
yeah.
you do have your critics. And
Mm,
what I try to tell myself with critics is if we could swap roles, would they swap roles with me or are they just going to throw stones?
yeah.
And most of the time they're just going to throw stones.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, anyone who's listening, it's like maybe that self assessment, like we talked about before, like, are you the person who is a safe space for people to share and to like, be vulnerable? Or are you that person that's throwing stones? And if you're the person who's throwing stones, maybe asking yourself why, like, why am I showing up in that way? Because it is hard for people, a lot of times in and I say this because I am grateful that I've had those opportunities and that I've had the ability to keep going and to keep pushing regardless. But some people don't have that. Some people don't have any fight left in them. And maybe that judgment or, throwing stones in that moment is like the final straw for somebody. That's their breaking point. And so I think, again, like, are we creating a positive environment or a negative environment for the people around us? And I think
Yeah.
it's an important question to ask because
Yeah.
sometimes, even when we have the best intentions, sometimes maybe we aren't showing up in the way that we want to for other people. And maybe we are doing things that maybe we don't realize.
Yeah, and it's easy to get self-consumed and distracted, especially, trying to manage a department on top of
Mm.
everything else going on. That I try to approach leadership not with iron fist. I won't, and I tell everybody that hires on with me, I said, you came here one way, you're going to leave here better. I said,
Mm.
if you don't leave here better, that's because you did not take advantage of the opportunities I was trying to give you. I open up training. I say, if you want it, you've got it as long as I can make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And I think that, no one wants to feel like they're stagnant. I don't know anyone who's like, yeah, I want to go backwards or
Yeah.
I want to, I think everyone wants to feel like they're
Yeah.
improving themselves over time. And I like that saying like, when you get to the end of this, you're going to be better.
Better.
And as a leader, I'm going to give you all the opportunities I possibly can to get you there.
Yes, ma'am. And like I said, my approach is a servant style leader because
Mm.
I'll bend over backwards for any one of my guys.
Yeah.
Like, but I will always be there. If it goes, if I'm shorthanded, I'll go work campus if I have to. I will be there because I know what it's like to have poor supervision, and I know how toxic it is, and I know how it can ruin your career.
Yeah. It's interesting because I talk to a lot of leaders and I hear, and I agree with this. I feel the same way. It's like you learn what to do from certain people and you have mentors and, positive influences and people who are going to help to elevate you. And then you also learn from people what not to do.
Right.
You see how people operate and treat people and you have that opportunity to be like, I want to be like this and I will never be like that. And I think
Exactly.
that they're both valuable.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yeah, because like I said, I've had some really bad ones, and I've had more bad than good, but the good ones have been very instrumental in my life, and they molded me to where I'm at. And
Yeah.
I'm thankful.
I want to ask you, because, we're talking about wellness and I know that, 23 years ago, the profession looked very different, but the conversation around wellness was also very different. And, you had mentioned to me when we initially spoke that you grew up in this suck it up environment,
Yes.
tough it out, keep going. And wellness wasn't really something that was a thing. And my question to you is, how did that mentality impact you over time? And again, like kind of going back to what we said before, I do believe that there's certain things that can be really good and certain things that can be really bad, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. And so were there maybe some good things that came out of that environment? And then were there some things that maybe you learned through that environment?
Definitely. And like I said, I grew up in the early stages of law enforcement. And I caught the tail end of some Vietnam vets as they were leaving out. So, and a lot of combat veterans in the in between too. And their mindset versus the mindset today is totally different. I sometimes feel like I'm more of a hybrid person because I got to experience the last of that generation who taught me to now I'm in a whole nother environment with, younger officers who are just starting out.
Yeah.
Um, it's trying to figure out just a good way to say it. I mean, I think the good things that I gathered was the grit of the older generation and how they were able to talk to people. I mean, they could be command presence, they could be firm, but they could always resolve a situation relatively quick. I mean, I learned a lot as far as tactics and everything like that from that group of people. And I guess you go back to where you're talking about like the suck it up, like the negative side of that is don't ever call in sick kind of deal. It's like you better come to work even if you're running a fever. Those are the kind of supervisors I had, and some of them were my mentors, but they instilled such a strong work ethic in me to keep me going and keep pushing me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really interesting conversation, this conversation of work ethic, because I have always had so much pride in my work ethic. It was like the one thing if someone's like, what are you most proud of? Or what is one of your strengths? And I'm like, I work harder than everybody else, not as like a judgment or comparison, but like, I just always knew that like, if I wanted something, I was going to work as hard as I possibly could to get there. And, I believe in preparation and that you get opportunities out of preparation and hard work. Like that was always, how I grew up. But I also think it was to my own detriment sometimes. I do think that I pushed myself harder than maybe I should have. I do think that I let my health and wellness slip, and I wasn't prioritizing myself through that work ethic. And so it is, again, it kind of goes back to that balance, but how do you find it? Because in one way I'm like, I'm proud of how hard I worked. But then it's like, when we're talking about wellness, how do we, instill this idea of like your wellness matters, and don't come to work if you're, super sick or like, maybe don't pick up that overtime and work 18-hour days. Like, and that to me, like working 18-hour days with no weekends has been like so normal, but I'm like, don't do that. But I'm doing that. So like, how do you?
I know you don't be hypocritical, and I'm guilty of the same thing. Because like I said, early in my career, I was working nonstop. I mean, it was just part of it. And then you realize it once you start having a family, you start looking at risk and reward, because you don't want to work yourself down so tired that you miss something like on a traffic stop or something like that you could have caught that ultimately could actually cost you your life or injure you.
Right.
And because I mean, it's a risky business out here to begin with, and being fatigued is not healthy at all.
Yeah. Well, and I also want to touch on something else in a moment, because that you reminded me of from our first conversation, but I think it's not a question. I've had to like, again, it goes back to that self-assessment, and for me, it's not a question of if I can do it, because I truly believe that like, I can do anything I set my mind to, and I think that you can relate to that, anyone who has that strong work ethic, and especially in your profession and in law enforcement, we're not questioning, do you have the ability to work that overtime shift? Or do you have the ability to push through your cold or whatever it is? Like, we know that you're strong and tough and resilient and all the things. The question is, should you be doing that? And I think if we have that self-assessment of like, it's not, can I? Because yes, I can. Should you?
Yeah.
Is it going to become a safety thing for you or your team? Does that mean that you're going to miss things at home or cause issues in your family life? And we talked about this a little bit offline, but you mentioned to me like a few things, in your personal life that maybe you missed as a result to working really hard. And I was hoping maybe you can share your experience with that too.
Yeah. So whenever I was a Texas State Trooper, we were deployed all over the state of Texas and mostly at the southern border because we had different operations going on down there. Of course, everybody knows you're fully aware of like the crisis that's kind of slowed down, but it happened. So we had to be there as state police. And you would go on these, 12 to 14-day rotations down there. Well, at the time, I had my youngest son, and I remember I was off for his birth, and then I took the very next wave, like it had just kicked off. And then from there, I lost count of how many times I went down there. But the thing is, from the time he was born till the time he was about 4 years old, I spent the biggest part of my life in a uniform and a patrol car, either working here locally or being deployed down in South Texas. And I guess one thing that I can't ever get back is, getting to see him walk for the first time on FaceTime video. I mean, that as a father, that hit hard, and that's something I can never get back. I mean,
Yeah.
I truly cannot.
Yeah. And I think, I can relate to not the same thing, but I can relate to having those moments of like, man, like I wish I was there, or I wish that I could get that time back. And there's a lot of young people in this profession right now, and I talk to a lot of agencies where vast majority are like super young and early in their career, maybe 5 years or less. And maybe someone who's listening to this can relate to that, or maybe someone is younger in their career and they don't have a family yet. But my hope is that, through these conversations, we can maybe start to instill a little bit of that proactiveness, to really take a look at it and try to identify what is important to you. And if you do miss out on some of those important times, how is that going to make you feel? And how can you put in those steps in advance to maybe try to minimize that? I'm not saying that you're going to be able to completely eliminate it. Things happen again. There's no perfect scenario, but how can you make time for the things that matter most to you?
And one thing that I have noticed with the younger generation, and they have a healthy work-life balance because they want to come and do their job, and then they want to go do what they want to do. And I kind of sometimes as a supervisor, I'm like, I don't know, you should be doing this, and this. But I also respect the fact that you at a young age are doing something that I probably should have done, but didn't because it wasn't even a thing. You know what I mean? It was very paramilitary. You be here, you be squared away.
Yeah, that is a really interesting topic that I've actually thought about a few times, because on one side of it, I totally understand being like, hey, like we want you to be dedicated to this career and, advancement and like be all in when you're here. But then like the conversations are about home life balance.
Yeah.
It is like,
Yeah.
hey, like I wish I would have done this. And I feel
Yeah.
like you should, but then you're not alone.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of leadership that's like, man, like these young kids, they just clock out and they want their time off. And
Yeah.
it's like, but isn't that what we have been
Yeah.
saying that they should do? So it is a delicate balance.
They have cracked the code. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't care. Like you can talk to them, and I try to talk to them in my mentality, and then I'll hear their side of the story, and then I'm like, I mean, I'm having to change the way I think to relate. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing. They understand how to balance everything out.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you about that because, I find it really fascinating. We all know that the older we get, the harder it is to learn new things, the harder it is to maybe change your perspective on things. Like we all kind of have a tendency, I think, to be in our train of thought, and it's what we know. And I really believe that like our perspectives and our perceptions on things are all based on our past experiences and our preconditioning. What have we gone through in the past? What did we learn? And every chief that I talk to on this podcast has come from your generation, right? They came from this suck it up, work the overtime, push through the sickness. Wellness really wasn't a thing. It was like maybe just go hit the gym and, lift really heavy and that's it. And everyone I talk to is put in this position now as leaders to have a different perspective and have an open mind and be willing to understand a different way of doing things. And I'm curious, maybe how you've been able to do that. And maybe what are some of the things that you're seeing that the younger generation is either needing or asking for that's maybe different than what you grew up with?
I guess one thing that I have noticed, I mean, they're very tech savvy. Like they got technology down pat. Like they can show me things on these social media apps I'm not even that old. Like, but it's just, I feel that way sometimes because technology is so advanced, but they can keep up with it. I mean, they're Johnny on the spot. They can look up anything on any kind of social media app. And I mean, that's great to have being comfortable with technology. But I think what a lot of young officers are struggling with is like the interpersonal communication skills. I mean, they are awesome when it comes to keyboard text and emails, things like that. But I really feel like not 100% of this job, but in the high 90 percentile, I mean, it's mostly de-escalation, how you talk to people and how you treat people, making good eye contact, being clear vocally. I guess that's their trade-off. So I'm not good at the technology and things like that, but I was broke into where you better learn how to talk to somebody because, working traffic stops at 3 o'clock in the morning on the side of a dead U.S. highway somewhere. You better learn how to talk to somebody because if not, you're fixing to be fighting or shooting.
That's a really interesting perspective. I don't know if I've ever had anyone say that in that way. And I'm definitely millennial. And say what you will about millennials, but I think I still grew up in an environment where like I didn't have social media until I was in college, and it was because my friend signed me up for it, and I was never really on it. And like I got dirty as a kid and rode bikes and like didn't come home until the streetlights were on. And like we had video games, but they were like on your like PlayStation, like in your dedicated like computer room that you shared with your parents, like it wasn't like as available as it is now. But it is really interesting that you say that, because I have noticed that and not everybody, but a lot of the younger people that I come in contact with, they do struggle with eye contact. They do struggle with, effective communication. There's almost like a timidness to it. And I'm very introverted and shy, and like I struggle sometimes too. So it could also just be maybe who they are. But I think through not having to talk to people in person, people don't like to talk on the phone anymore. It's all text, and so you do, I think, lose a little bit of that, impersonal.
Yeah, because with words on a screen, there's you can't read it. If I'm talking to you on the phone or I'm looking at you right now, you can see my body language, you can hear my tone, my pitch. There's a whole lot you can pick up just by watching,
Yeah.
Because people talk to you subtly, and that's how you pick up deception and things like that. It's not blatant; it's all subtle movements, and you've got to learn how to read people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to be really fascinated to see, like, as time goes on, how you guys are overcoming some of those challenges with younger people coming in who maybe don't have a lot of experience with, communication and connection, like in-person connection, and maybe what that looks like at an academy level, if there's some sort of like different module or class that has to happen, or, because I
Yeah.
think a large part of it too is, you know, one, being able to say what you mean in a tactful way, right? And not an emotional way. You have to have like the ability to effectively communicate with people. But I also think that emotional intelligence and empathy play a big role in what you guys do. And if you don't have that experience with people, how can you empathize with people? Or how can you have that emotional intelligence to kind of understand what's going on in a room or with a particular person if you don't have any of that experience? So I'm really interested to see how that progresses over time.
Yeah, you and me both, because, and I know that it is an issue because I just was recently appointed to an advisory board for the Angelina College Police Academy, and that was one of their concerns too. That the instructor was talking about the the new cadets or young cadets that come in. You can tell, like, the age group, not so much. I mean, you have older cadets that have life experience, military vets, things like that, who are trying to get licensed. But what they're seeing is the interpersonal communication, and that's something they're trying to work through and trying to figure out how to work through it, because you got to have the gift of gab in order to be successful in this job, because you've got to be able to talk to people. A lot of times when you get called to these people, they're not in their best place. They're either under the influence of something, or they're super stressed out, angry, suicidal. That's a
Yeah.
big one. I mean, you got to be really careful when you're talking to someone suicidal.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, like, even just strategically, like if you're wanting someone to cooperate with you, you
Yep.
hear the expression of like a good strategy is breaking bread, and sometimes quite literally, like, hey, you want to like eat with me, and like we talk, and having those conversations. So yeah, that's really interesting. I've never had anyone bring that up on this podcast. I'll be interested to see how academies approach that moving forward, because I think
Yeah.
it's going to get harder and harder. We have a lot more social media. You have like all the AI and the goggles and all the things that are happening.
Hey,
So
that's a whole nother topic right there.
I know we could go forever. I think everyone is kind of waiting to see what happens. I was actually just talking to someone recently, and I was like, I don't think that if I ever have kids, we'll put it that way. If I ever have kids, I don't think that I would have to teach my kids how to drive, because I don't think that people are going to be driving in 16 years. Like, I
That,
think things are going to be very, very different. I think things are going to progress really quickly. But I just remember everyone was like, that's so scary. Everyone's like trying to figure out what's going to happen. So I think we could talk about that all day,
oh
but
yeah.
we'll save that for another conversation. The last like topic really I want to talk to you about is this kind of idea of controlling the controllable. You had mentioned to me when we talked offline about how this job can impact you over time. And you mentioned this on the podcast already, but the types of calls that you guys get on a consistent basis, and one could be a suicide call. One could be, a stolen bike. They all ranges of things that you have to see throughout even just one singular shift sometimes, and what that does to your long-term health. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but that piece of it is something that you can't control, right? Like, you can't control what type of calls you get or the people you encounter. And it's the job that you signed up for, is to, have that kind of unpredictability. And another conversation I had recently was in this idea of sleep, and how you can't control sometimes the amount of sleep you get, because maybe you're working overtime, or maybe it's your day off and you have to get up so that you don't miss your kid's soccer game. And now you only got 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And so while we can't control those things, there are certain things that we can control. And that's, maybe the habits or the routines or the resources, or the way we respond to things. And so my question for you is, are there any resources or things that you have found to be successful over your career that have helped you to kind of control the controllable in an uncontrollable environment? I know that was a big one.
Yeah, that's a
I
big one.
rambled.
Yeah, that's a big one. And it's one of those deals you go and you do and you don't think about it if you come out unscathed.
Mm,
But I know over time, things do build up on you and it's weird because like I said, you do bottle things up. And then you do have breaking points. I've had breaking points before to where it's like you've held it in, held it in, held it in, held it in, and then you explode. Like not geared towards anybody or any one person, but you've had your wits in, and I guess the mental health aspect of things too. That's something I have noticed that is actually getting attention. When we have a law enforcement foundation here, and now they've got an anonymous service to where you can call in and actually visit with somebody over mental health. I mean, there are resources available that has never been there. Like this is stuff that is just now coming to light. I think he started this maybe a little less than a year ago.
yeah.
And to think that it's, I don't know. And that's what concerns me too about this profession. And it's like the military as well. The, I guess the silence. And then like you get the suicides, and that's because your mind, once it's quiet, and all you have left is the vivid memories, and so now you're just constantly reliving, 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 reliving. It's not healthy. I don't have the answer. I've struggled myself with certain things, but I was able to get through it. And I think that goes back to my faith
Mm,
because I'm very devout and there's a lot of truth in the scripture. I know people have their own opinions about it, but it's gotten me through a lot.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And, the one thing that really gets me excited about wellness is that it's not a one size fits all, and everyone has their own thing that helps them through their hardest times. And, for you, it's your faith. And for someone else, I had someone who was like, I really like woodworking. Like that is my happy place. And like I go there and I just feel so much better. And I just feel like I'm present in the moment. I'm not thinking about anything else. And, I think sometimes we try to put everything into these like neat boxes. And I love having these conversations where everyone's like, yeah, like things have impacted me. Things have been really, really hard. And this is what helped me, and so I appreciate you sharing what's helped you. And, I can relate to the silence and the uncomfortability and the fear in that silence. I have this, I'll never forget this because it was like kind of a pivotal moment for me in my kind of wellness journey, if you will. But I was in a class. I was actually in training. I was learning how to be in this wellness space. Like this was something where I knew like I wanted this to be my career. I wanted to be in the wellness space. I wanted to help people. And I had done a lot of self-work. And to that point, like I had thought that like I was like, I wouldn't say like fixed or healed in any way, but I had done a lot of work and I thought I was maybe in this like really, really good, strong space. And I was in this training class, and in this particular training, they were teaching meditation. And I had never meditated before. I had done like nervous system regulation stuff, and but I had never like actually sat in silent meditation. And at that time, I had shoved everything down, and I was kind of still working through a lot of that stuff that like I didn't want to deal with. Whenever you shove something down and you throw away the key, it's probably because you just don't want to deal with it, right? And I had flashbacks and different things, and we were in this class and there was probably 10 of us. And the teacher was like, okay, we're going to sit in a circle, very like kumbaya type of vibe, and everyone's like, hey, we're going to sit in a circle and we're just going to sit here in silence for 10 minutes. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, that is my worst nightmare. Like, in that moment, I was like, sitting in silence, one is my worst nightmare, but then sitting in silence with 10 other strangers, like ultimate nightmare. And so I struggled through the entire thing. I was like slowly coming into basically a panic attack the whole time because I did not want to do that. And when it was done, I like burst out the room in hysteria. Like, I just remember like having a full panic attack, dry heaving, like crying. Like, it was really, really emotional and really not great. It was a little embarrassing, to be honest. But afterwards, I talked to the teacher and I was like, I don't want to do that ever again.
Yeah.
And he's like, my homework to you is to do that more. And I was like, no, I don't think so. I'm like, I don't want to know what's down there. Like, I shoved that stuff down there for a reason. And I'm scared to know what's going to come up. Like, I was genuinely scared. And he looked at me and he goes, Paige, if you can't sit with yourself, how do you ever expect anyone else to sit with you?
Yeah.
And it was like that moment where I was like, wow, I still have a lot of work to do. And there's obviously like unresolved things and undealt with things that are like really far down there that I need to like work through. But I realized that like I have to be the one to show up for myself first. I can't expect anyone else to show up for me or be in my corner or sit in the mud with me if I'm not willing to do that for me first. And so that really helped me, kind of get through those things. I will be completely honest. I'm still not the best silent meditator. I like to have more guided meditation than like the silent, because my mind, it still is going everywhere. So having something to ground me is nice. But that was a thing that helped me. So
Yeah. 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 And like I said, I like to walk. I love walking through the woods and things like that. And of course, I run a small farm, so I have plenty of chores and stuff to keep me busy, at home. So I'm a very busybody because I don't like to get consumed by the silence. I'm always going to find something to do, maybe slightly ADHD, because I'll start something, see something, go start something else again, because I've always got to be moving and doing. I can't sit.
yeah. I had an interesting conversation with someone a few months back, and it was this question of like, is what I'm doing healthy or not? It was kind of like just, and it was in the context of work. So he was a chief, and he was like, he's like, I work a lot. And some people might think that like I'm a workaholic. And I question if that is positive or not, and it goes back to what we talked about, like the work ethic, and is it good or is it not? And I kind of sat with that for a second. And what I realized is that I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing certain things? Are we working really hard because we love it and we have like ambition and goals and drive? Or are we doing it because we're trying to escape the reality of something else? Are we distracting ourselves because we don't want to deal with something? Or is it because like you genuinely just like to walk and be with your farm animals, and like that's something that brings you joy? And so I think if we can kind of sit back and say, am I doing this to escape or avoid or numb? Or am I doing this because it genuinely brings me joy and it's a part of like what I like to do, which is a part of also my wellness? And so I think if we can say like, yeah, like I just really like to do that,
Yeah.
then do more of that, but if it's like, yeah, I'm doing it because I don't want to talk to my wife, or I don't want to like go home, or like I don't want to deal with something that I should deal with, then I think maybe it's more of a reassessment of how can we get past that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I do enjoy my job. I mean, I show up all the time. Matter of fact, I just took off for the first time since I took this part on, and I've been here for a little over 2 years now, I believe.
Mm.
And I finally took a day off. So I, I don't know. I like the responsibility of it, and I I like to have control, and my guys will tell you 100% that I need to learn how to delegate more.
Mm,
I'm guilty because I do not delegate, and I should. I mean,
same.
I've got a chain of command. I've got a sergeant. I mean, I've got people who could help me. I'm just hard headed.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. My final question for you before we wrap for the day, and this is in the context of wellness for the younger generation. What words of wisdom would you say to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe if you could go back 23 years and speak to your younger self with all the knowledge and wisdom that you have now, what words of wisdom would you share? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Yeah. Well, to the young officers out there, never forget that this job will expose you to most things that people will never see in their lifetime.
Mhm.
Trauma isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. And I think in those moments, faith in God, guilty, I mean, that's where I keep my faith, has been my anchor. Don't let the silence after the chaos become unbearable. In the rush of the noise, well, I guess in the rush of the call, it's easy to distract yourself in the chaos and the adrenaline and the paperwork or the humor. And then, like I said, we get back to the silence. So when the noise fades, you have to face what's left inside.
Mm,
That's where officers can get lost. I've been lost. And so I know this is personally. And don't carry it alone. Always lean into your faith, lean into your brothers and sisters in the profession, lean into your family. Um, because the truth is, you can be tough, you can be tactical, you can be squared away, but you're still human. And that's not weakness, but that's where God does his best work, is whenever you have found your breaking point, that's where you get stronger and more resilient.
wow. Thank you. Those were great words of wisdom. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for coming on here with me today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.